God has made a way where there was no way many, many times in the 60-year history of Eastside. And here's what I believe. I believe God's not done with us yet. We believe that as followers of Jesus, we are unfinished people. God is not finished working in you. God is not finished working in me. This is quite possibly the most essential and urgent times in our lives when we must move the mission forward. I dream of a church that is reaching out to our unchurched neighbors, to a church where the broken, the beaten, and the traumatized can find healing. So why wouldn't we believe that He's going to be faithful? Look at what God has done. Well, hey everybody, how you doing? I'm so glad you're here as we're celebrating Eastside's 60th all month long. And let's get started by giving a great big welcome to our Eastside family on the other side of the camera in Redlands and Vegas and Park Rapids and Bellflower, Anaheim, online. We love you guys so much. Love doing this together. And so last weekend, we launched our 60th anniversary series, Unfinished, by declaring we are unfinished people. And God is not done with us yet. And Eastside is an unfinished story. And we feel that God is leading us to do some huge things in both our own spiritual lives and in our church in this next season. And so we're embarking right now on an adventure that is unprecedented, and it's bigger than anything we've ever done or attempted as we prepare to launch the second 60 years of the Eastside story. And if you were like out of town last weekend, or if you had sick kids and you just had to miss, we showed a 10-minute vision video kind of summarizing this unfinished initiative. And I want to encourage you to go online and watch it. You'll just find it at eastside.com/unfinished, or maybe some of you would like to go back and watch it again. Also, last weekend, we gave out what we call our Unfinished Guidebook to kind of help you on the journey that we've prepared. And again, if for whatever reason you weren't able to be with us last weekend to get yours, some of our fabulous change makers right now on your campus will bring you one. If you'll just raise your hand, keep it up high at every campus, they're going to find you in just a moment. And I want to encourage you to bring this guidebook with you every week, because there's 4 things that you'll find in here. First, there's a summary of our unfinished vision. Second, there's a place for message notes each week during this series. There's small group material, and I'm so thrilled. The engagement in small groups is just off the charts and unprecedented for us right now. So way to go on that. And then lastly, you'll find in this book our commitment card that we're going to be using in the weeks ahead. And I just hope you'll put this someplace special and allow it to be a spiritual growth tool in your life. Now, once you get your book, first thing I want to ask you to do, there's a pen with it, put your name inside of it, okay? Because there's a lot of these floating around. And I want to ask everyone today to turn to page number 34, where you're going to find a section for our message notes today. And if you got a guidebook last week and forgot to bring yours today, we got you covered. Just grab this QR code that's appearing on the screen right now. It'll take you right to a digital version of the guidebook to help you get by. Bring yours back with you next week. Now, the primary goal of our Unfinished initiative is that 100% of us would engage with God in a season of gospel-driven generosity discipleship, because we're unfinished people. And our theme verse, as you've heard, is from Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, where the Apostle Paul says, I am certain that God, who began the good work, notice it's within you, will continue His work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. Now, whether you've been a follower of Jesus for 2 months or 2 years or 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, God is still working within you and me to make us more like Himself. Barbara and I have 3 grandsons. We're crazy about them. We wish we'd have had them first. We love them so much. When a baby's born, everybody always asks, well, who does he look like? And at first it's hard to tell, because neither parent really looks like a wrinkled up prune from outer space. But by the time that little guy is a couple years old, they start resembling somebody, and people start saying things like, well, you can sure see his dad in him. And then when he's about 21, you see him at a family reunion, and it's uncanny. He's got the same mannerisms, the same build, the same laugh as his dad. When you first become a follower of Jesus, you probably don't look a whole lot like your heavenly Father. You're unfinished. But as the years go by, and as we grow in our unfinished faith, people ought to be able to say, there's something different about you. You're starting to reflect more and more like the love, the joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control of your heavenly Father. Is God finished doing his work within each of us? No. Is God finished doing his work through Eastside? No. So we're embarking on a 2-year, $54 million generosity initiative across our 6 campuses that's made up of 3 different areas. First is uncompromising faith, which is our day in and day out ministry budget. Second, we want to unleash unprecedented hope in the next 2 years with local and global compassion projects of $8 million, including a new school in Kenya, a special needs center there, helping survivors of human trafficking, and so much more you can read about. And we want to extend unrelenting love by multiplying our impact with improvement projects on every campus, launching 4 new campuses in the next 2 years, 3 domestic, 1 international, and reducing our long-term debt so we can go further faster in the years ahead. All of that over the next 2 years. That's our secondary goal. Now, I want to ask you not only to be here every weekend for this series, but to make sure you join us for an unforgettable evening of advanced commitment and our blowout anniversary event celebrating 60 years of God's faithfulness. We're going to celebrate like we've been waiting for this for 60 years, like no other time in our church history. It'll be a night you will never forget. We've got free, delicious appetizers and desserts and cocoa and coffee, along with free childcare and a lot of surprises along the way. So this is our time for everybody to celebrate. For those who are ready to make an advance commitment to do that, you can see the dates right here. Vegas is coming in a few weeks. A week from this coming Friday, all our Southern California campuses together, and Park Rapids family, I'll be there this Friday night and can't wait to see you. I'm bringing a team from Southern California with me to Minnesota, a Brazilian, a Costa Rican, an Indian. I expect you to teach them to speak Minnesotan while they're there, okay? You betcha. Now, throughout the Unfinished series, we're looking at and learning from one of the most important figures in human history, Abraham. In Genesis 12, we learned last week, at 75 years of age, Abraham experiences a special call from God when God asked him to pack up everything and to leave his homeland, leave his family, leave his country, and to go to a land that God would show him, and that he would become the father of a great nation, and that all peoples of earth would be blessed through him. And spoiler alert, one of those descendants that Abraham didn't know, the blessing for all people would be Jesus, the Messiah. But God didn't tell Abraham and Sarah where they were going. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 in the New Testament, it says, it was, everybody say this word, faith that made Abraham obey God when God called him to go out to a country which God had promised to him. He left his own country without knowing where he was going. Just like a man, right? Can you imagine this conversation between Abraham and Sarah leading up to this move? He comes home one day and says, honey, guess what? I've got great news. She says, we're going to Hawaii? No, God spoke to me. Oh, really? God spoke to you? Yes, and honey, he wants us to move. Move at your age. Where? Well, I don't know exactly, but we're going to wander around living in tents for a while until he tells us where to settle. And no, I haven't been drinking. It's crazy. But at 75 years of age, Abraham was an unfinished person with an unfinished faith. And from his life, we learn this big idea today, if you're taking notes. God can do the impossible and will often call you to do the impractical. You see, Abraham had to decide, and you and I have to decide if we're going to trust God or not with our lives in what seems so impractical. God comes to Abraham with this crazy promise, and Abraham is like, I'm old. My wife, we've battled infertility for years. She's barren. This makes no sense. But God is saying, I know this is ridiculous, and that's why I'm choosing you. I want to start a family through you. In fact, you're going to have to wait even another 25 years for that child. But if you trust me in the impractical, I will do the impossible. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, it would be great if Abraham's choice in Genesis chapter 12 led to an unbroken string of obedience and a dazzling succession of faith victories, but honestly, that's not how things play out. Let me give you the first application, and then we're going to unpack it, okay? We learn to trust God through times of testing. We learn to trust God through times of testing. God calls Abraham in Genesis 12, and before the chapter is even over, a famine hits the region where Abraham and his family were staying, so he has to detour to Egypt because that was the only place with food. This was a test. Would he trust God on this detour to Egypt? Let's pick up in Genesis 12, verse 11. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. In the Hebrew, it means, I know how smoking hot you are. When the Egyptians see you, when they see you putting on a smoke show, they will say, this is his wife, and then they will kill me, but will let you live. So Sarah, say you're my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Rather than trust God to take care of them, Abraham fears that when the men of Egypt see how beautiful Sarah is, they'll kill him in order to take her. So he asked her to lie and to say she's his sister. This is like an episode of Jerry Springer. It's Crazy Town. Like if Abraham was standing right here today, I'd like to ask him straight up, like, Abraham, did you really believe that the God who promised to make you into a great nation and your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, that he was going to kill you in the second chapter? Right? Like that's just not going to happen. But Abraham's already vacillating and trusting God in this time of testing. And this doesn't happen just one time. It happens at least 5 times where he dramatically drops the ball. In addition to this scene in Genesis 12, he makes a huge misstep in Genesis 16. After a few years, God still hasn't given him a son, and he grows impatient, waiting for the child that God had promised. We read in Genesis 16:2, so she, referring to Sarah, said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abraham, go sleep with Hagar, the house servant. She can bear you a child. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Guys, I ask you, what was he thinking? Can't you see him? Well, babe, Hagar is only a 20-something, and I'm much more attracted to women in their 80s like you, but if I need to take one for the team, I'll do it. What an idiot. Abraham should have said, honey, you're the only girl in the world for me. I couldn't even think of being with another woman. He should have trusted God to provide. And the result of his immorality was the birth of a son named Ishmael. And now they're all under one roof. Abraham, Sarah, Ishmael, Abraham's mistress. Do you think, hey, now it's a success and everyone's happy? Not even close. Abraham, the spineless wonder that he is, says, hey, you girls work that out. And he lets Sarah, who is bitter and resentful, start abusing Hagar simply for doing what Sarah asked her to do. That's failure number 3. Then in Genesis 17, failure number 4, God reappears to Abraham to renew his promise to give him a son through Sarah. And Abraham laughs. Abraham scoffs at God right in the face. And then finally in Genesis 20 is failure number 5. Abraham runs into another king who scares him. And so he lies again about Sarah being his sister. He makes the very same mistake in Genesis 20 he did in Genesis 12. Now, I don't know about you. I'm feeling a little better about my own unfinished faith journey right now. Anybody else? But friends, this is how we grow. We learn to trust God through times of testing, even when we screw up. You see, if God had given Abraham a son immediately, it would have been a cause for celebration, but it wouldn't have required trust. Abraham, in a sense, had to feel this total helplessness in the face of Sarah's infertility before he would fully rely on God and rely and trust his promises. Is God doing that with you? Is he pushing you to the brink? Listen, the path to becoming an Abraham is not always pleasant. God leads you through the valleys so that he can show you, he can provide for you there. He sends you into storms so that he can demonstrate he has the ability to walk on water. He surrounds you with conflicts so that he can show you he has the ability to provide a table for you in the presence of your enemies. You only learn to trust God in times of testing. Have you ever had to take a really hard test, like one you really didn't want to take? One of my favorite stories is about the college professor who was a specialist in ornithology, the study of birds. And this particular professor had a reputation for giving very difficult tests. Well, it was time for the semester final, and the students were unprepared for what they were about to experience. On the table were 25 different stuffed birds that had paper bags over their bodies. All you could see was their feet. Not their feathers, not their bodies, no wings, just their feet. And the professor says, our test today just has one question. Identify all 25 species of birds just by their feet. Well, one kid goes ballistic. He says, this is ridiculous. Nobody studies birds' feet. I can't identify them by their feet. And the kid gets up to walk out. And the professor says, if you leave now, I'll flunk you for the semester. And the kid says, fine. And the professor says, what's your name? And the kid rolls up his pant leg and says, you tell me my name. All through life, we go through tests, and sometimes those tests are really hard. And I think in some ways, unfinished is a test for each of us. God is going to call some of us to give and sacrifice in ways that are going to scare us. And the question is, will you trust him? Will Barbara and I trust him? Most people don't give in a way that God has called them to give because they lack trust in God's provision. We give in a safe way, a calculated way. Why? Because we don't trust God. Abraham had Sarah lie to the Egyptians because he didn't trust the provision of God. Abraham committed adultery with Hagar because he didn't trust the provision of God. Biblical generosity is a test that's meant to change us. If your giving isn't changing you anymore, then it's possible that your giving isn't in the place that God wants it to be. Does your giving challenge you to trust God? Some of you in the next few weeks are going to be challenged to take like your first step to trust God in this area of generosity for the first time in your life. Others of us will be challenged because deep down we know our giving has just kind of become routine and God wants us to take it to the next level. Someone asked me the question one time, if you were God, would you give you more money? Holy cow, that's a convicting question. Because I want to be the kind of person that shows God that I trust him. But am I that kind of person? Really, am I? Sometimes it's easy to say, well, if I had more money, then I'd be more generous. And I wonder how many times God is saying, why would I give you more resources when you don't honor and trust me with the resources I've already given you? We learn to trust God through times of testing. Now, here's a second application for you today. Confidence to risk for God comes from comprehending the commitment of God. Now, to be honest with you, everything I've said up to this point today has really just been a setup. It's been the introduction to share with you the story that I want to show you now in Genesis 15. So this may be the longest sermon introduction in the history of Eastside, right here. After 60 years, we're still breaking records, okay? So in Genesis 15, you're going to love this. Abraham is going through one of his times of doubt, and God appears to him in a vision. And God says, it's Genesis 15, chapter 15, verse 1, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." And Abraham says, "Phew, thanks, God. I was getting so nervous. That helps a lot." No, that's not what he says. Abram replies to God, verse 3, "You have given me no children." God, speaking of reward, where is the child that you promised me? Do you hear the doubt? Verse 5, the Lord takes him outside and says to him, "Look up at the sky, Abraham, and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." God says, "Abraham, I know you and Sarah don't have a child yet. I know it's been a few years since I promised you. I know you're 80 years old now. I know it seems impossible, but look at all those stars. That's how big your family is going to be." And then occurs maybe the most important verse in the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. Abraham believed the Lord. Believed the Lord. And he, God, credited it to him as righteousness. Notice Abraham believes the Lord. In other words, he has faith. The Lord credited that to him as righteousness. Sometimes people ask, if Jesus saves us in the New Testament era, how were people saved in the Old Testament era when Jesus was not there yet? Well, they were saved in the same way that we are in the New Testament era. In the Old Testament era, they were looking forward in faith to a Savior. In the New Testament era, we look backward in faith to a Savior. In the Old Testament, they had faith that God would keep his promise, that God would send a Messiah. In the New Testament era, we have faith that God kept his promise, and he did send a Messiah. The only difference is they looked forward to the cross, we look backward to the cross, but it's the same faith that saves us. So there's this huge moment right here where Abram believes God. It's the most famous verse on faith, maybe in the entire Bible. And you think, well now, faith is rock solid in Abram as ever, and he will never, ever question God again. Wrong. In the next verse, God reminds him that he's going to give him a land to dwell in. And here's Abraham's response. "Sovereign Lord, how can I know? How can I know that I'll take possession of it? How can I know?" Abraham's doubting again. And he's doubting two things, and these two things form the basis of every one of our doubts. The first is, God, how can I trust you? It's been years already. God, are you really going to keep your word? Are we really going to have a son? How can I trust you? And the second question is, how can I trust me? Because I've proven that I'm so unreliable so far. What if I screw this up? And here's God's answer to that in Genesis 15. And stay with me right now because this is so powerful. It's going to be worth it. Let me summarize verses 9 and 10. God says, "Bring me 5 animals. A cow, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon." A cow, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon. Cut them in half. And find a ditch and put half of their bodies on one side and half on the other side so that their blood flows down in the ditch and makes like a river of blood. And they're like, "You want us to do what?" Now, we live in a written age, so when we want to get a guarantee, we like to get it in writing, right? I'm going to guarantee in writing. When a contractor quotes you a price to do some work on your house, you ask for it in writing. And if the contractor comes back later and says, I've decided to charge you more instead, then you say, hey, not so fast. Here's your name on the contract, guaranteeing it in writing. Well, in their day, instead of signing a contract, they would cut a few animals open and they would walk through the river of blood so that it splashed up on their robes, saying, if I don't keep my end of the covenant, the agreement, may this happen to me. It's a blood oath. The Hebrew word for covenant literally means cut. They would say, cut a covenant, like we say, sign a contract. Now, honestly, I think this might be a more effective method with a few of the contractors I've dealt with in my life. How much you charging me for painting my house? I don't think so. The blood on your pants says differently. So God and Abraham, they're supposed to make this blood oath, this blood covenant at sundown. Let's pick up in verse 12. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Now, get this. Abram's sleeping. Who passes between the bloody animals? Who makes the blood oath? It's God. It's the Lord with a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch. Don't miss this. Who didn't pass through the bloody pieces? Abram. In those days, if a king made a blood oath with a servant, the servant would walk through alone because it was always just assumed a king would keep his end of the bargain. This is the only covenant in recorded history where the king goes through and the servant doesn't. Now, don't miss this, don't miss this, don't miss this, don't miss this. Here's what this means. If God fails to keep his side of the bargain, he'll pay with his blood. But if Abram fails to keep his side of the bargain, God will also pay with his blood. Think about this. God makes himself responsible for both sides of this covenant. God says, I'll pay the penalty with blood if I don't keep my end of the covenant, and I'll pay the penalty with blood if you don't keep your end of the covenant. Don't miss this. This is giving us the clearest picture of Jesus in the Old Testament. Just like Abraham fell into a deep sleep, we were in the deep, dreadful sleep of our sin. The Gospels tell us that when Jesus died, a dreadful darkness descended upon the whole earth, and Jesus' blood flowed out of his side like a river. Was God's son dying because he hadn't kept his end of the bargain? No, he was dying because we hadn't kept our end of the bargain. Friends, this is how much God loves you. This is how much God has given you. And it compels me to want to be generous because Jesus gave us the greatest gift ever given. When I name Jesus as my Redeemer, not only will he always keep up his end of the bargain, he will make up where I mess up. God, who began the good work in me, will continue that work until it is finally finished. This is why I say, confidence to risk for God comes from comprehending the depth of this commitment of God. Look at Proverbs 24, verse 16. Though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again. I love that. They rise again because even though they fall 7 times, God is still faithful. Friends, this is the story of Genesis chapter 12, chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. God gives this amazing covenant to Abraham. You're going to have a family as numerous as the stars in the sky. And then Abraham falls. And God picks him back up again and says, you're going to have an amazing family, and I'm going to bless the whole world through you. And then he falls, and God picks him back up again. And God says, I'm going to bless you, and every nation will be blessed because of you. And then Abraham falls, and God picks him back up again. Friends, that's my story. That's your story. We all fall. And God keeps picking us back up. You screw up your marriage, God will pick you back up. You fall back into porn, God will pick you back up. You say some words you wish you had never said to people that you love so much, God will pick you back up. Unfinished is our opportunity to show God we trust his promises, and we risk for God because we understand and comprehend the extent of the commitment of God to us. Amen? So let me ask you this question. Will you trust God to do the impossible when he calls you to do the impractical? You know, the 60-year story of Eastside is a story of average, everyday people who risked for God, trusted God when they comprehended the extent of his commitment and love for them. And we all live in their legacy. I don't know that there's many in the Eastside family currently that's been around longer than the 3 generations of the Zeeb family. And this family has the kind of faith that this church has been built on. And I just want to share with you right now a little bit of their story.
My mom and dad both have a heart of service. Ever since I was a little guy, I remember they would be involved in something at church, whether it was my mom playing the piano or teaching Sunday school, or my dad and mom teaching Jet Cadets, this junior high program that they helped with. And that just impacted me. It's impacted my family, this legacy they built by accepting this invitation to Eastside Christian Church way back in 1963.
I had recently lost a mother who had a serious health problem with cancer, and so that was like in the summer of '63. So it got me thinking about life could be pretty short with losing individuals like that were close to me.
Eastside was in a warehouse at that time. We came a year after they started. It changed our lives completely.
And I wanted to get involved. I was following people around saying, what can I do?
I jumped in with 2 feet into the children's ministry and the women's ministry.
There was an opportunity to serve the Lord working with some young people.
The Jet Cadets?
Yeah, so
Jet
that
Cadets.
was called the Jet Cadets. And we got involved as sponsors. That was a blessing. It started to get me to see that I could be used of the Lord.
Being with people who love the Lord, that rubs off on you. And when that rubs off on you, you want to share it with other people. We were happy to serve. There were times when it was tough to serve. So we tried to adapt to everyone that came in. And we did. There is something for everyone here. There is. It awakens people's souls, I think, when they get to know the Lord, you know. It's wonderful to see someone accept the Lord and then step out. That's what that means, I think. It's for everyone.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, my parents are in their 80s. They could rest on what they've done in the past. They could rest on all that they've accomplished and the accolades that they might have been given while they served, but they still continue to be involved in service at their church because they're unfinished. They're not done yet. God is not done with us until when? Until the Lord Jesus returns. And so until that time, they're going to continue serving as much as they can. And that's been passed on to me as well. And that's why I am involved in Kids Side or have been involved in being on the elder board here at Eastside myself, is because I have that heart that they've passed on to me through this legacy.
I love that. I love that. I love the Zeebs. And even in their 80s, they still acknowledge we're unfinished. And you know, that's a humble legacy they leave in this church. And you know, every single one of us that follow Jesus, we're going to leave our own legacy with our lives. And I hope and pray in the coming days and weeks, I hope that when you see this commitment card lying around your house, I hope you'll just see it so much more than a piece of cardboard or paper. I just hope you'll see it as a spiritual growth tool, something to keep in a prominent place for you to think about, to pray over, to have family conversations over. This is an opportunity to leave your legacy for God's unfinished work in the next 60 years. When Abram gazed upon the stars that night, he couldn't count their number. He couldn't see the beginning or the end. He didn't know how this vast, powerful God was going to work all things. All he could do was believe God. He just trusted God. God can only do the impossible when we trust him to do the impractical. Maybe you're single right now and you'd really like to be married. Would you trust God in this season? Would you really trust him? Maybe you're an empty nester and you're trying to find a better way to add value with your life now that the kids are out of the house. By the way, beware, they come back. But can you trust God and let him grow your unfinished faith in this season? Will you be generous to the Lord who has shown kindness to you? Maybe you're married, you got a house full of kids, or you have kids in college. It's like making another mortgage payment. Believe me, I know, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Will you trust God? Will you test his faithfulness? Even in these challenging financial times, I believe God's asking us to take a huge step as a church. And my question for you as we close today is this: what's the barrier? What's the barrier that is keeping you from completely trusting in God as an unfinished person with an unfinished faith? What is the thing? What is the fear? What is it? Maybe it's control. Maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's greed that's keeping you from fully trusting God with the impractical so that we could witness God do something impossible among us. Let's bow our heads and pray about it. Can we do that? God, I just pray right now that whatever barrier, whatever situation, whatever life circumstance is holding us back from fully trusting you and being generous, I pray that you would remove it. And God, we pray that you would reveal to each of us personally and individually, as couples, as families, whatever it is that you're asking us to do in this season of unfinished. Even if it feels impractical, even if it might be ridiculous. And if there's an area where we're not trusting you, God, then help us to learn to surrender. We want you to complete your unfinished work in us. We love you, God. We thank you for your amazing covenant to us, made in blood, that when we fall down, we can get back up because you will never, ever give up on us. Because you paid the price, our price, with your blood. We're overwhelmed, and we thank you and worship you with gratitude in Jesus' name and for his sake. And everybody said, amen.